Clara Bennett never imagined that one careless second could change her entire fate. She rushed through the icy corridors of Ashford Medical Center late at night, gripping a small white box of prescription pills, just enough to help her grandfather sleep through one more painful night. Her lungs burned from running, her uniform clung to her skin, and she still had another shift to survive before morning broke over downtown Chicago. Bright hospital lights buzzed overhead. Nurses called out instructions. Machines beeped behind. Curtains and Clara moved through it all like a shadow and agency nurse on a temporary contract with no room for error. She rounded a corner too quickly. A heavy door flung open. She collided with someone tall and unmovable. The box flew from her hands, pills scattered across the floor, and her palm landed on something unmistakably personal. For a moment, everything froze. Then a voice cut through the silence, low, calm, and sharper than glass. "Did you think touching me there would earn you something, Miss Bennett?" Clara's breath caught. She looked up into the ice-blue gaze of Alexander Graves, CEO of Ashford Medical Holdings, a man whose name alone could wipe out careers. His tailored charcoal suit was perfect, except for the wrinkle where her hand had landed. Her heart thudded violently. "I'm sorry, sir. It was an accident." She dropped to her knees, scrambling to collect the pills. Her hands trembled as she fought the panic rising in her throat. She couldn't afford a mistake. Not when her grandfather's relief depended on these pills. Alexander stepped forward, casting a long shadow over her. Nurses watched from a distance but said nothing. No one dared speak when he was angry. "One touch," he said, voice controlled. "And you thought you could rise that easily?" She shook her head. "Please, I wasn't thinking. My grandfather needs these." She scraped the pills off the cold marble with shaking fingers. She wouldn't cry. Not in front of him. Not here. He crouched beside her. She saw the faint stubble on his jaw, the tightness in his gaze. He picked up one pill, held it between two fingers, and dropped it gently into her palm. His touch barely brushed hers. But a jolt ran through her chest, as if her entire body had suddenly remembered it was alive. "You will pay for this, Miss Bennett," he said, barely louder than a whisper. "In ways you don't understand yet." Then he stood and walked away. His footsteps echoed behind him like a closing door. The hallway returned to life. The machines beeped. The nurses moved. Everyone pretended it hadn't happened. Clara slowly got up, gripping the box in her hand like a shield. "One touch," she muttered, her voice bitter. "One stupid, accidental touch." She turned away and walked to the patient's room. The box rattled in her hand with every step. Her stomach twisted. She couldn't afford to lose this job, not now. But deep inside, something told her that everything had just changed, and there was no going back. The next morning, Clara stood outside the door that separated her world from his. She hadn't planned to come back. After what happened the night before, she expected to vanish into the crowded wards again. Just another nameless temp erased from the schedule, but the hospital administrator had spoken with cold finality. Her shifts were cut, no reason given. Just a quiet cancellation and a clipped goodbye. The moment she heard it, she knew the truth. Alexander Graves, the man she had touched by accident, could destroy her life with a nod. And he had. But her grandfather needed the pills again, and she had no other way to get them. So now she stood trembling outside his office door. Prescription slip in hand, the other pressed to her chest to calm the panic. She knocked once. No answer. Her fear nearly made her turn around, but she forced herself to push the door open. Inside, his office stretched like a fortress of glass and shadows. The city skyline glowed behind him, casting a blue haze across the expensive furniture. Alexander sat behind a black desk, his attention locked on a document. But the tension in his shoulders told her he knew she was there. When he finally looked up, his eyes pinned her in place. "You have 1 minute, Miss Bennett." His voice was calm, almost bored, but it tightened the air around her throat. She stepped forward, barely touching the thick carpet beneath her shoes. "I need my hours back," she said, her voice shaky but clear. "My grandfather is sick. I need this job." He tapped one finger on the edge of the desk. The silence stretched like a wire pulled too tight. Then he stood and walked slowly around the desk until he stood right in front of her. "Do you think an apology undoes what you took from me?" he asked. She blinked. "I didn't take anything from you. You touched me, Miss Bennett. No one has touched me in years. Do you know what that means?" Clara swallowed hard. His voice didn't rise, but it pressed against her chest like a weight. The air between them felt sharp, dangerous. It was an accident, she whispered. Alexander studied her face for a long moment, then glanced at the crumpled prescription slip in her hand. When he looked back at her, something had shifted. Wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't cold rage either. "You want your hours back?" She nodded. "Then earn them," he said. "From this point on, you'll work directly for me. No more wards.
Ow.
No night shifts. You'll report here to this office every evening until I say otherwise." She stared at him, the words barely making sense. "Work for you? I'm a nurse. I don't understand." "You broke something in me," he said, his tone even but darker now. "You will fix it, or you will pay for it." She backed into the edge of the desk, stunned. "I don't know how." "To fix something like that?" He raised his hand, but didn't touch her. His fingers hovered near her face, so close she felt the warmth of his skin, the pull of something strange and powerful. Then he dropped his hand. "You'll learn," he said. "If you want your grandfather to sleep tonight, you'll learn." That night, Clara left his office with a new ID badge clipped to her uniform, granting her access to the top floor, and a small vial of medication tucked deep in her pocket. She took the train home numb, as if she'd signed something with her blood. She had no idea what she had just agreed to. But when she opened the door to her tiny apartment and saw her grandfather sleeping peacefully for the first time in days, she whispered to herself the same words she always had. "I'll survive this." Too. She always did. The nights that followed blurred together in ways Clara hadn't expected. Every evening, she walked through the towering glass doors of Ashford Medical Center, not in scrubs. Not to serve patients, but to report to Alexander Graves's private office on the top floor. Her badge gave her silent access past security and curious stares. She didn't understand what her role was. He never explained. He never touched her again, but his presence pressed closer with every passing night. Sometimes she would find him standing at the window, hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the city like a king surveying a kingdom he couldn't trust. Other times, he sat in silence, head tilted back, eyes closed as if he could only rest when she was in the room. She was never given tasks. Not exactly. Some nights he handed her thick medical files and asked her to read them out loud. Long, technical documents about pharmaceutical investments and patient studies. She didn't understand why her voice mattered to him, but she read anyway. His eyes stayed on her the entire time, unreadable. Other nights, he asked strange questions. Did she like snow? Did she ever miss where she grew up? Did she think about leaving the city? Clara didn't know how to answer. The man in front of her was Alexander Graves the Cold, an unfeeling CEO who rebuilt Ashford Medical from the ruins of his father's scandals. A man known for his silence, feared for his decisiveness. The media called him ruthless. The staff called him untouchable. And yet, here he was, asking if she liked snow. One night, after an hour of silence, he finally spoke from behind her. "Are you afraid of me?" Clara didn't turn around. She stared at the window, her reflection barely visible in the darkened glass. "I'm more afraid of losing my grandfather," she said. The truth hung in the air like something fragile. When she finally turned, his face was unreadable, but something. And his eyes had cracked. That same week, a storm swept through the city. Thunder rolled over the skyline, lightning flickering across the floor-to-ceiling windows. Clara sat at the desk, flipping through files, trying to stay focused. She could feel him standing behind her. "Do you know what it means when a man is alive but dead in every part that matters?" he asked quietly. She turned to face him. His eyes weren't cold now. They were heavy, not with power, but with fear. A fear she recognized because it lived inside her too. It was the fear of losing something before you ever truly had it. She didn't. Answer, she didn't need to, because that night, Clara Bennett saw the truth in Alexander Graves's eyes. He wasn't just a man who had been broken, he was a man who had never believed. He deserved to be whole again. Clara didn't know when she started noticing the patterns inside Ashford Medical. But working closely with Alexander, she began to see what others ignored. The hallway conversations that stopped when she walked by, the way Dr. Whitmore, the hospital's senior physicians, slipped into Alexander's private wing late at night, always carrying sealed envelopes and never logging his visits. The way the board members whispered about legacy and control, not patience or medicine. She hadn't meant to uncover anything. But when you've lived your life, it's watching people's body language to know whether rent will be late or food will be skipped. You learn to read the smallest cracks. One evening, Alexander was called away for a late board meeting. Clara stayed behind, pretending to sort through a stack of files on his desk. At first, it was just to pass the time, to stop her thoughts from spiraling. But then she saw ITAN envelope wedged beneath a finance report. It was barely visible, just the corner showing. There was no name on the front, only a stamped insignia. Same one she'd seen on the sealed bag of medication he'd once handed her for her grandfather. Something about it felt wrong. She slid it free. Inside were printed medical reports. Her eyes scanned the lines, then froze. Patient. Alexander Graves' diagnosis. Medically sterile physician. Dr. Everett. Whitmore, she read it again and again. She felt the cold rush of disbelief crawl down her spine. But what caught her breath wasn't just the report, it was the second page. It's handwritten notes in a different ink. Corrections, mismatched dates, conflicting test results, test numbers altered. The discrepancies were subtle, but Clara had seen enough lab work during her nursing shifts to know what was real and what was forged. This wasn't just a medical report, it was a lie. Someone had altered the results. Someone had built a paper wall to make the world believe Alexander Graves couldn't father a child. She suddenly understood the stakes. Legacy, bloodline, control, and how badly someone wanted to break him from within. Footsteps echoed in the hall, voices low, calculated. One of them belonged to Gregory Ashford, Alexander's uncle. The other was unmistakably Dr. Whitmore. She panicked, Clara. Slid the envelope back under the file and wiped the surface with the sleeve of her jacket. She sat back in the chair, heart racing as the door opened. Alexander entered, his tie loosened. The weight of boardroom exhaustion slumped across his frame. He looked at her, surprised. "You're still here?" he said. She nodded. "You might need something." He didn't reply, but his eyes lingered on her longer than usual. Something about her silence, her stillness. She wanted to tell him right then about the papers, about the lies. She couldn't, not yet, because she knew how icily powerful men could be made to believe or destroy. Instead, she just asked gently, "Are you all right?" Alexander didn't speak. He walked past her, standing by the window. The reflection of the city shimmered across the glass, breaking his outline into fragments. "The board wants me to marry Charlotte Wynne," he said. Clara's heart dropped. "They think a marriage will silence the rumors," he continued. "That a child will protect the family's name." She didn't know how to respond, so she told him the only thing she could. "I don't believe what they say about you." He flinched, not visibly, but in a way she felt. A part of him she hadn't seen cracked open just for a second. "You should believe it," he said. "I've believed it for years, till you." But he didn't finish the thought. Instead, he turned back toward the window, his palm pressed to the glass. His breath fogged a soft circle against the cold. "You broke something in me the night you touched me," he whispered. "I hate you for it, because I don't know how to want this, but I do." Clara stood in silence, her fingers tight against her sides. She wanted to reach for him, but she didn't, because now she understood. A kind of war was being fought behind the hospital's clean walls, and what it might cost to stand on his side. Clara couldn't sleep that night. Her mind kept circling. Back to the medical reports, the forged test results, and Alexander's broken confession by the window. She didn't know why she had been pulled into his world, but now that she was in it, she couldn't look away. 2 days later, she stayed late at Ashford Medical, pretending to file documents for the night shift. She waited until Dr. Whitmore left his office and slipped into the private records room he always kept locked. Her heart pounded with every step. She had no clearance for this. If she got caught, she wouldn't just lose her job, she could be arrested. Its own gravity. And she couldn't unsee what she had already seen. She logged into the system. Using credentials she'd memorized from a clipboard weeks ago, one by one, the real files opened. The test results didn't match the official reports. There were dates. That had been changed, lab notes rewritten, key results reversed. The truth was undeniable. Alexander Graves was not sterile. The lie had been planted carefully and maintained for years. But the original data, tucked deep in the digital records, told a different story. Clara downloaded every document onto a small flash drive she'd hidden in the sole of her sneaker. Just as she slipped it into her coat pocket, she heard footsteps. In the hallway, 2 voices, one calm and oily Gregory Ashford, the other nervous Dr. Whitmore. She didn't move, didn't breathe, pressed herself flat against the cabinet, praying they wouldn't come in, through the slit of light under the door. She saw Gregory's expensive shoes stop just outside. His voice was casual but dripping with threat. If that nurse gets in the way again, make sure she understands. Accidents happen in this hospital all the time. Clara closed her eyes. She waited until they were gone, then ran down 6 flights of stairs out the back. Exit into the freezing night. She didn't go home. She went straight to the high-rise building where Alexander lived. Her fingers were numb as she pressed the intercom. She didn't expect him to answer, but his voice came through, tired but alert. Come up. She climbed the stairs to the penthouse, her pulse crashing in her ears. When he opened the door, he looked at her with a mix of confusion and dread. Oh. She was soaked from melted snow, hair dripping onto the polished marble floor. Without a word, she held out the flash drive. I know the truth, she said, her voice breaking. They lied to you. They lied to everyone. Alexander didn't move for a moment. Then he took the flash drive from her hand, his eyes scanning her face like he was searching for a lie and couldn't find one. He stepped aside and let her in. His penthouse was pristine, cold, minimalist, untouched by real life. Clara stood awkwardly while he plugged the drive into his laptop. The files lit up the screen pages of data, signatures, conflicting reports, all pointing to one truth. The lie had been built layer by layer. They had made him believe he was incapable of producing an heir. They had planned to push him aside and install someone more obedient in his place. When she looked at Alexander again, his face was unreadable. You shouldn't have done this, he said quietly. They'll come for you now. Clara stepped closer. I couldn't watch you believe their lies, not when I could prove the truth. He studied her like she was something fragile and unexplainable. You've given me back something I thought I lost a long time ago. Then for the first time, his hand reached out, not hovering, not hesitant. His fingers brushed her cheek. Just enough to feel her warmth. It was the first real touch since that night in the hallway. This time, it wasn't an accident. That night, Alexander Graves didn't sleep. He called emergency meetings before sunrise, trusted board members, legal advisors, private investigators. Everything that had been whispered in the dark was now laid bare under harsh, blinding light. Clara stayed in the corner of the room, silent, her phone buzzing with missed calls from the hospital. Her absence had been noticed, but she didn't answer. She couldn't return to the same halls that had nearly buried her in silence. Alexander's eyes found hers across the room. His voice was firm, commanding, but when he spoke to her, it softened. In a way no one else would have believed. You shouldn't be here. She looked up at him, drained but steady. Where else would I go? This is my fight too. He crossed the room and sat beside her on the wide leather couch. Their shoulders brushed. For a man known for his distance, he no longer flinched from closeness. I don't want you to fight, he said. I want you to be safe. You and your grandfather. You've already done more than enough. Clara turned toward him and took his hand. She didn't flinch from the roughness in his palm or the tension in his fingers. She held it tighter. You can't ask me to walk away now, she said. Not when I know what's coming. Her voice didn't tremble, even though every part of her knew the storm wasn't over. Gregory wouldn't go quietly. Charlotte Wynne would not give up her grasp without a final blow. The next morning proved them right. Gregory arrived at Ashford headquarters, dressed for victory, with Charlotte at his side. She wore a diamond ring like a crown, the media already buzzing with news of their engagement. Her smile was perfect, polished, and fake, the boardroom filled with gray suits and greedy eyes. Gregory took the floor with calm arrogance. Due to recent health findings, he said, Alexander has agreed to step down as CEO. He is no longer fit to lead. The Ashford name deserves an heir. The room went still. Clara stood behind Alexander's chair, her pulse pounding so loudly she barely heard him speak. Sit down, Gregory. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. He slid a manila folder across the glass table. Inside was everything official. Reports, timestamped data, forged signatures, and the real lab results. The truth was now documented, sealed, notarized. You forged my medical history. You paid off doctors. You lied to this board. Gregory's face twitched, his smirk faltering. Charlotte stepped forward, trying to regain control. The board needs stability. A wife, a child. You've proven you can't. Security moved before she finished her sentence. 2 guards stepped forward, cutting her off, escorting her out of the boardroom with practiced silence. The last thing Clara saw was Charlotte's face, pale with disbelief. As the door shut behind her, Gregory followed moments later, his voice drowned by the sound of his own downfall. Alexander didn't speak again until the boardroom emptied. Only then did he turn to Clara. He didn't thank her, didn't promise anything. He just looked at her the way he had the night. She brought him the flash drive like she was the only thing in the room that mattered. They stepped outside together into the cold January air. The sky hung heavy with snow clouds, but neither of them felt the chill. Under the wide stone archway of the Ashford building, he stopped and turned to her. You gave me back something I didn't know I was allowed to want. His hand found hers, their fingers intertwining without hesitation. Clara lifted her other hand to his face, her fingers brushing along the edge of his jaw. She didn't ask him to be perfect. She didn't ask him to promise anything grand. She just stayed. And when he bent his head and kissed her, it wasn't about winning or power. It was about a man who had spent his life building walls, and the woman who walked through them anyway. They returned to Alexander's penthouse that night. The city below buzzing with headlines and speculation, but inside the glass and steel silence they called home. None of it mattered. Clara sat by the window, knees tucked to her chest, the lights of Chicago blurred beyond the glass. Behind her, Alexander moved through the shadows, his steps quiet. When he reached her, he rested his hands gently on her shoulders. She leaned into him without hesitation. Stay, he murmured, not just meaning the night. Stay for real. She didn't answer with words. She turned in his arms, lifted her eyes to his, and nodded. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe it was finally the beginning. In the days that followed, Clara tried to believe the worst was behind. Them, Gregory and Charlotte, had been removed. The forged reports were exposed. Alexander's place at the head of the Ashford legacy had been restored. But power never surrenders. Quietly, and secrets don't die just because they've been revealed. They lived together in a strange kind of peace. Mornings began with shared breakfasts, laughter over burnt toast, quiet updates about her grandfather's health. Evenings passed in soft conversation, sometimes about nothing at all, to the public. She had become a figure of curiosity. Alexander, Graves's scandal, his downfall, his redemption. But to Clara, it didn't matter what the world called her, because in the moments that truly mattered, she wasn't a nurse or a symbol or a name on a tabloid headline. She was just his, and he was hers still. Some nights, when the city lights flickered and the weight of the world hung in the silence, she saw the tension in his eyes, the way he stared out at the skyline like it might collapse at any moment, the way he gripped her hand tighter without realizing it. Then came the letter, a crisp white envelope slipped under their door. No stamp, no name. It's just a message, handwritten in perfect script. Clara found it first. She held it for too long, the paper turning soft in her fingers. When Alexander read it, his jaw clenched, ripped it in half without a word. But the silence that followed said more than any threat. She knew it came from what remained of Gregory's circle, those who had feasted on his power and weren't ready to let it go. That night, Alexander stood by the window long after she had gone to bed, his palm against the cold glass. Just like the night she first saw him begin to break, she knew he was afraid. Not for himself, for her Clara. Tried to pretend the threat would pass, but the fear seeped into their quiet, into their mornings, into his questions when he asked if she was okay 3 times before she left the apartment, into the way he stayed awake until she returned. And then, the day came that changed everything. She found out she was pregnant. It didn't feel real at first. She sat on the bathroom floor, the test shaking in her hands, 2 pink lines staring back at her. Her chest filled with 1,000 emotions she didn't know how to name. She thought of Ruth, of all the promises she'd made to her grandfather, of Alexander's hand trembling the first time he touched her, like he didn't believe he was allowed to feel. She wasn't ready, but she knew she couldn't hide it. Alexander found her sitting on the edge of their bed, one hand pressed to her stomach. His voice cracked when he asked, "Is it true?" She nodded. He knelt in front of her and covered her hands with his. His shoulders shook, not with fear, but something closer to disbelief. "I'm not sterile," he whispered. "Not broken." Clara opened her mouth to speak, to tell him he had never been broken, that everything they'd built together had been real. But her throat closed with emotion, and all she could do was nod and let the truth settle between them. He leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't soft, it wasn't sweet, it was fierce, like a man clinging to the one thing that proved he still had something to fight for. Clara thought that was the moment everything would finally settle. The baby would be a beginning. That love would be enough. But power doesn't let go, and enemies don't disappear when the truth is exposed. It happened fast. She was leaving the clinic after her first prenatal checkup. Snow had begun to fall again, dusting the sidewalk. She didn't notice the black car idling across the street. She didn't notice the man following her into the parking garage. Not until it was too late. A hand grabbed her from behind, slammed her into the concrete wall. Her vision blurred. Pain exploded at her temple. Fingers dug into her coat, ripping it open. She screamed. Not because she thought anyone would hear her, but because it was the only name that gave her strength. Alexander. She fought with everything she had, nails clawing, legs kicking, heart refusing to give in. Then silence. She faded, and when she opened her eyes again, she was in a hospital bed. White walls, beeping monitors, sterile light above her. Alexander sat beside her, gripping her hand so tightly it hurt. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot with fury, and fear never left hers. "I failed you," he said, voice rough. "I let them get too close. That won't happen again." She wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault. No. That the city had never forgiven her for being the one he chose. That someone had wanted to make sure the child she carried didn't survive. But the words never came, so she just held his hand tighter and believed him. The doctor said the baby was safe. Clara would heal, but something inside her felt splintered. It's not just from the attack. It's from the way fear had threaded itself into the walls around her life again. She turned to Alexander that night in the hospital bed and said, "I need to leave New York, just for a while, till I can breathe without looking over my shoulder." He said nothing at first. Pride flared in his eyes. For a moment, she saw the man who had built an empire too strong to run, too guarded to bend. But then, he saw her trembling hands. And without another word, he nodded. He packed a bag the next morning. No press, no announcement, no goodbyes. They left before the city could wake and see its king walking away, not with a trophy wife or a power deal, but with a woman from nowhere. And a child born of something unexpected. They settled in a coastal town far from the lights, a place where the skyline didn't press down on them. No one knew their names, Clara learned. How to sleep through the night without the hum of traffic. Alexander learned how to burn pancakes, how to laugh again, and how to rest his hand on her belly as the baby kicked, reminding them both that something beautiful had survived. And yet, even in peace, the city still whispered, because legacies don't stay buried. And Alexander Graves had one final war to win. Peace was never meant to last. One quiet afternoon, Alexander received a call. The board at Ashford Medical was in chaos. The very same executives who once sided with Gregory had now seen the damage his loyalists left behind. The company was hemorrhaging. They wanted Alexander back. Clara sat with him on the porch, her feet curled beneath her as the ocean wind tangled her hair. He told her everything about the numbers, the debt, the desperate calls for him to return and restore order. She looked at him, then at the horizon. "You're going back," she said softly. He didn't deny it, but then he turned to her and said, "Not without you." Her hand found his. "Then we'll face it together." When they returned to New York, the headlines exploded. The fallen CEO returns with his scandal. The girl from nowhere. It's the air no one expected. Reporters camped outside their building. Photographers followed them from hospital entrances to grocery stores. Clara kept her head high. She'd walked the halls of Ashford as a nurse, invisible. Now the world couldn't stop watching her, but that wasn't what mattered. What mattered was Ruth waiting at the apartment door. Her frail arms opened wide, trembling as she hugged Clara, then hesitated before reaching for Alexander. When her hands settled over Clara's belly, she gasped. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "Thank you for bringing her home to me." The moment wrapped around all of them, Ruth, Clara, Alexander, and the life growing inside her. Time passed quickly. Clara stood in the delivery room, sweat on her brow, pain sharp and blinding, her hand locked in Alexander's. He never let go, not once, and when the baby cried for the first time, Clara looked up at him. What she saw in his eyes wasn't power or pride. It was something else. It was peace. They brought their daughter home to a city that still watched them, still whispered about them, but no longer controlled them. And for the first time in her life, Clara felt like the ground beneath her feet belonged to her, not because she had taken it, but because she had earned it. Clara stood by the window of their new apartment, watching the city lights flicker far below. Her daughter slept quietly in the crib beside her, tiny breaths soft and steady. The hush of their home wrapped around them like a promise. Behind her, Alexander moved through the room with quiet steps. He stopped when he reached her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "You should rest," he murmured. Clara didn't move. She simply leaned back into him, eyes still fixed on the skyline. The city had once felt like a cage. Now it was only a memory. She thought of the hospital hallway where it had all started, the pills in her hand, the cold voice that changed her life, the accident that wasn't really an accident, and the man who had looked at her like she was a threat until he looked at her like she was the only thing he wanted to protect. She thought of burnt toast, late-night confessions, hospital beds, and the night she screamed his name in the dark. Not out of fear, but out of love. Alexander stood quietly behind her, his presence no longer cold or distant, but grounded and warm. She turned slightly, enough to catch his reflection in the glass. He looked older now, softer, still strong, but not unreachable. Her voice was quiet. "I used to think this city would swallow me whole." His breath stirred her hair as he whispered, "You never had to fight it alone." "Not anymore," she said. The baby stirred, a soft sigh escaping from the crib. Clara stepped closer and laid a hand over the tiny chest that rose and fell beneath the blanket. Her daughter's warmth reminded her that not all stories ended in ruin. Some ended in redemption. Alexander moved beside her, his hand finding hers. "Again, promise me," Clara said, turning to face him fully. "No matter how hard it gets, No matter what they say, promise me, you'll never let the world decide who we are." He didn't hesitate. "You have my word." And she knew he meant it, not just for tonight, not just for this quiet season, but for every storm that would ever come after. When Clara finally lay down beside him, their daughter breathing softly between them, she closed her eyes with a heart that no longer ached for escape. She didn't dream of leaving. She dreamed of staying, of fighting, of loving a man who once believed he was broken, proving him wrong every day. And when she would one day tell her daughter the story, she wouldn't begin with the accident or the hospital or the fear. She would begin with a choice to stay and to love. Even when the world whispered she shouldn't, because real love doesn't ask for permission. It simply stays.